Hello, and welcome back to Terminus Extreme Metal Podcast. I am the Black Metal Guy.
And I am Hyper Shaman.
And summer is a coming in the beautiful Midwestern United States. And we are here today to talk about Neofolk and industrial and related forms, or post-industrial and related forms.
The post-industrial sphere.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so in the past, Hyper Shaman has come on to do specialist brutal death episodes with the death metal guy, or slam episodes, right? Because
the slam gore,
right.
The stuff with a lot more blood and sex than your average brutal death metal.
Right, and because I'm allergic to sex, I have to sit those episodes out. And so this time, the death metal guy is allergic to droning acoustic guitars and neo-medieval collage production. So he's sitting this one out. And yeah, these are a couple records that came out a month or two ago, and it's a review we've been meaning to do for a minute, and figured we should do it as kind of a special, concentrate our forces into a special episode on this rather than trying to slam these in alongside other stuff. So this will be I know there are a lot of our listeners who are into this stuff, and it's something we'd like to cover more of in the future, so let's go. We've got two for you. We've got Poseidon and Crooked Mouth, and they're sort of different sides of this neofolk post-industrial ambient spectrum. Leading off with Poseidon. This is the self-titled debut record by the project. It is out on the Italian Brucia Records. And the most significant thing about this project for Terminus listeners is that this is it features the two core songwriters of Spite Extremewing, Argento and Azoth, along with Algol of Forgotten Tomb, who re-reviewed on the third episode of Terminus many years ago now, and also of Heimat. So these are all Italian black metal masters, and they recorded this at the peak of Spite Extremewing's career. The four of these tracks, tracks 1 through 3, and then track 6 are all from one session in 2006. Track 4 was originally recorded as a Spite Extremewing track in 2007, and others were laid down around the same time, 06, 07. So this would have been in the period between Cosmocrator and Ultra. And this is definitely not metal. It is a very different approach, although you'll hear shades of Spite Extremewing throughout. And it's an attempt to make music in a radically different way. So both of our records today are pretty concept heavy and have carefully written, actually interesting press materials that were written by the bands themselves. So let's read Argento's description of this record as a starting place. Poseidon started to take shape in 2006 when Argento and Algol were visiting Le Tombe Beach on the southwest side of the island of Elba. Parentheses, that is where Napoleon was imprisoned. Anyway, on that rugged and uncontaminated shore, made of black serpentine stones blending into the dark abyss of the night, near the site of ancient Etruscan tombs, they both shared the ambition of being able to replicate the hypnotic poetry of the sea, mystically uniting sky and earth with its repetitive yet ever-changing flow of music. And just like waves, Poseidon's music moves, wanders, and becomes one with the singing sea. So, this is composed in a different method from a black metal song, right? This is all these tracks were written and recorded in late night, same night sessions. They jammed to write riffs and come up with ideas, and then I think used some of those riffs as the center for structured improvisation. So this is improvisatory composition, not just in the sense of, structured improvisation as a method of composition, which means it has much more to do with the way that an industrial band like Coil or Throbbing Gristle would have worked, or, of course, free jazz bands in the 70s, or psych rock bands. Krautrock, I think, is a big reference point here.
Yeah.
And there is a deliberate shift, and with that method, that more open-ended method, there is a different kind of mood, right? So, and that is this sort of oceanic flowing sound linked to not just to the ocean in general, but really specifically to the sort of enveloping warmth of the Mediterranean. So you had some interesting thoughts about that in the notes, Hyper Shaman.
Specifically about the Mediterranean?
Yeah, but about, the Genoa.
Yeah, so, Genoa, as I'm just fascinated about various things about most history before the 17th, 18th century. So
right, before
before the hats started getting silly in a bad way.
Right.
So I was mostly aware. I had only actually, when reading more about Spite Extreme Wing again for this review, I hadn't realized that they were from Genoa, which kind of like made a light bulb go off in my head, like, oh, that's why I've always found a lot of Spite Extreme Wing stuff to sound a bit nautical, a bit oceanic, at least more like a sailing rather than sitting on a beach watching the tide come in. But the Genoa is pretty much lodged right between the Mediterranean and the Alps. The region it's in, I think it's Liguria. Liguria, yeah, is just literally like a strip of land between sea and mountain. And the height of Genoa's power was at the head of the Republic of Genoa, which was like a lot of Greek civilizations, thalassocratic, meaning their means of power was controlling the sea. They controlled parts of Spain, parts of North Africa, just that whole Western Mediterranean sphere.
Sort of a foil to Venice.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So, that part of Italy, and Italy in general, except for the most northern parts, you're never that far from the ocean.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Genoa has this interesting thing where it's very far north in Italy, right? So it's closer to the culture in some ways of, France or the southern Germanic countries.
Yeah,
because it's the Occitan or something.
Yeah, you have the Tuscan areas, you have the Piedmont north of it, which is going to be more, closer to that southern France Occitanian sphere. And
that's always been a part of the Spite Extreme Wing sound, but it's also really close to the sea. And, it's poised between the mountains and the sea is an interesting thing about the place, right? Mm-hmm. So it's both much further north than most of Italy, but also very much tapped into this Mediterranean, pan-Mediterranean world.
Yeah, it's right in between two extremes in a way.
Mm-hmm. And the dominant mood in Spite Extremewing's earlier stuff is it has to do with the sky, right? We talk on the show about and maybe the mountains, right? So like one reason this release is so exciting is this is the first we've really heard from Argento and Azoth, at least in working together in a way that's clearly related to Spite Extremewing in quite a long time, and since like 2008, and we talk about Spite Extremewing as one of the most important bands in black metal because in a way they kind of finished building the musical vocabulary of black metal, or completed it, and also founded what we call solar metal. They were really the first to do that, and they paved the way for a huge shift in the overall tone and harmonic base in black metal that really didn't happen until 10 years later, right? From around 2016 to 18, right? Where the French bands on Antic start coming out, or, Cavern and Necropole start to be really widely recognized and things like that.
And you even start seeing, what the show likes to call outlaw rock.
Right.
Kind of pulling on similar things.
Yeah, like Makwahital and, and those bands, right, those American bands who are tapped into this brighter, more overtly diurnal, noble sound. And also, really, on some of the more Western aspects of Ultra. But so hugely influential on black metal, and a band that had a way of being ahead of their time while also not being a direct influence on many of the things that picked up in their wake. And this again is a record that is very ahead of its time. These are all, the interesting thing, right, is that these are all old tracks. Right, they're from exactly the time when those Spite records were coming out, and even then they were sort of doing this. It was part of that process of reaching the limits of black metal, right? So there's this, and sort of trying to pass beyond them in a deliberate way. So. It's a response to this built-in structural limitation of black metal, right? Which is its rhythmic rigidity and its deliberately rigid minimalist song forms, right? And a rejection of improvisation. Spite Extremewing is just riff, 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 riff. Every riff is insanely good. There are not even transitions between the riffs. Everything drops into the next riff. That's not it's a limitation, but it's not a weakness, right? It's part of traditional black metal. It's this creative discipline built into the music. You want this feeling of terrible closure, and you want these stark, clear forms that were especially important to Spite Extremewing, right? Where they built riffs that looked like lightning bolts, riffs that looked like Dorian temples, right? This sort of
it's black metal's a very narrow but deep span. You can go really, really far in strange places with the limited tool set in front of you.
That's a very good way of putting it. Yeah, I like that.
And this Poseidon feels like opening up, allowing in these more foreign techniques and timbres and sounds.
Yeah, and another aspect. So deliberately restricted choice of rhythms in black metal, right? Well, within those, Spite Extremewing were always incredibly good rhythm players, right? They understood that within those parameters, rhythmic play and articulation were part of what made something really heavy, right? But I guess by this time, right, they were starting to sense possibilities beyond those parameters. And so this is something, this move towards more open-ended song structures, different kinds of rhythms, and more room for improvisation and stuff is something we are only just starting to hear with newer bands in the last few years, right? And so once again, the Poseidon guys and also, you know, Algol were working on this like 15 years ago, right? They were trying to do this in a way that had something to do with black metal, but obviously wasn't black metal. Anyway, yeah, and so brief, I guess, let's move towards samples, get into the music, but any other overall remarks you had about the sound here? Like, how has it moved away from black metal, say?
Yeah, I mean, to me, this is, I guess, the more I think about it, equally like a post-industrial thing, but also, in a certain way, post-black metal, because you are taking the kind of a black metal essence and you're moving away from that traditional tool set. I mean, sound-wise, I mean, like you said, there's a certain... I heard a lot of the, like, 70s weirdo psych, prog stuff in there. Maybe I'm just primed for that with, you know, my upbringing and other things I've listened to in my life. But, I mean, I even hear...
No, that sounds right.
Like, yeah, I mean, I even hear smatterings of just not even, like, weirdo prog, but some regular prog, too. I mean, a lot of these... The timbre and the synth sound straight out of like 1972. I mean, I swear that and you're gonna hate me for saying the name, that on a The Who record on Quadrophenia, I swear has some of the same exact synths. Well, and that album also even has certain oceanic themes to it.
Wasn't the Quadrophenia movie set by the seaside? There's
one of the
epic punch up on the beach, right?
Yeah, one of the pivotal things in like the story of the record is him returning to Brighton Beach, right, where there was a big fight between the mods and the rockers, and he's trying to like essentially find like his
he's trying
life.
To get laid.
Well, that too. That's also important. He's trying to find, like, the girl he loves and also some remnant of the glory he felt being a part of that. And, like, basically, like, the latter half of the record is very much oceanic. But like, halfway through the record, he, like, is essentially going to kill himself, but ends up just, like, riding his scooter off a cliff into the sea, but jumping off.
Right.
Yeah, so like but that all aside, the synths are super period appropriate for like first half of the 70s. Yeah, and I mean I even wrote in here one thing that I always thought was so cool about Ultra was they very were deliberately stated like the instruments and equipment used to record this album are vintage from the 1970s.
Yeah, so that's it. If there's one record by Spite Extremewing that directly connects to this, it's Ultra. Because by that point, they had much more expansive structures. The music was more on the flowing side, heavy use of... Spite Extremewing had always been really interested in a handful of really powerful motifs. But here they restrict that even more and try to get as much mileage and out of they can. So there's this intense ebbing and flowing continuity to everything. And it's still pretty sky-oriented music, but you could hear that more open, rolling, oceanic sound here too. And I think you're right. Yeah, didn't they use like Mellotron and stuff?
Yeah, there's a Mellotron on this, which that's super like the court and the court of the Crimson King, like that's a Mellotron. It's an amazing instrument. It essentially, I believe that's the one where it the key presses actually play a section of magnetic tape. So it's a very strange analog sound, but major like late 60s, early 70s.
Cool.
That was like hugely popular instrument.
It shifts the tone from, they'd always had a quote warm sound, but before it was like searing light, right?
Yes.
And Solar Spear. And this, in on this record, it's more of an enveloping, sensuous way. So
much softer and diffuse.
Yeah. So all of that carries into this new record. Let's listen to something off of Ultra, just to get you an idea, just to give the listener an idea of what Spite Extreme were doing right around when they were also recording these Poseidon tracks.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so after that, the song locks back into more up-tempo material, but the entire, we played that long section, over 3 minutes, just to give you an idea of how open and flowing and kind of landscape-like the middle of that section is. With you talking about sort of the landscape around Genoa Hyper Shaman, it's almost, you kind of hear big expanses of waves cresting on a shore that rises in height as the track goes on.
Yeah, there's man, it keeps bringing to mind. There's this specific picture of Argento where he's like, he's like standing on the rock, surrounded by the sea.
Yes,
in his big ass boots and his clean haircut.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a classic. Yeah, it's his like. Wasn't Columbus from Genoa?
Ooh.
Yeah. It's like a Columbus statue, right?
Yeah. The famous explorer. Yeah, no, he was from Genoa.
Although I guess his origins are obscure. But anyway,
yeah.
Let's go to a track now that people have heard that, right? I mean, one almost wonders if the Poseidon jams kind of worked as R&D for Ultra, for parts of Ultra like that. You know?
Yeah, with like the first couple songs, totally, I could see that.
Because they were on that ocean shit at this time, right? And you could, like, you can really hear it there. So, let's go to, a track off the Poseidon that is very similar, and a sample of about the same length, and it develops in the same way. It's centered on, it's the second track on the record. It's called On the Cave of the Nymphs. It's 12 minutes long, and I think by far the most substantial and just, it's like it's the best track on the record, I think.
Yeah, it's the standout. It's the statement of purpose.
Yes, there's a 5-minute track before it called Aphros that is also good, and that sort of builds towards it, but this is like the fulfillment of those ideas. And it centers around a riff that would not be out of place on Ultra, but delivered in a really different way. So and you'll hear that the way it's developed is a lot less like metal, and a lot more like, industrial and cosmic music and whatever.
Mm-hmm.
That one is slow but very exciting.
Yeah, well, there is a lot of power in the attack on that guitar, and the sequence of whether he's palm muting or not. It's the guitar part especially is much more complicated than it lets on, just in the finesse of like letting it ring out, holding it.
Yeah, dun, dang, dun, dun, dang. Yeah, it's really pulsed. And and the rhythmic alignment or non-alignment, like the counterpoint with the independent melody on the mellotron is, or whatever organ they're using is.
Yeah, I don't know which.
Yeah, it is mellotron. They used a few different ones, but yeah. The way that they cut across and lock in at various points, it's pretty cool. Like, those are not they're equally weighted riffs, and the pulse in the guitar interacts in a cool way with the pulse in the drums, and we should talk about that. Like, listening to it again on headphones, I see like how that the drums are even more important to this track than I realized.
Oh yeah, and so he's playing the traditional Irish hand drum, the bowden.
Yeah, and that's Algol. He does some of the guitars, but also a bunch of hand drums, right?
And it's I mean, and it's a lot different from your average hand drum in that it uses you don't really use your hand, you use a little beater stick, and often you kind of can change the timbre of the drum itself via like different hand positioning, so it's got a much richer pulse to it because of that.
And the other core pulse thing here is the wave samples, which you can hear at the very end. The drums, the waves, and the gulls. You would have, like, the core rhythmic sensibility is coming from the wave samples. And the drum is working in time with that, like a sort of a heartbeat against the waves. And then you've got this more syncopated, pulsing, kind of intrepid guitar line, right? The guitar wants to move ahead over the waves. And, that wonderful sine, like, expansive sine melody on the keys. I feel like this is the track where they make the fullest use of the freedom available to them and of the best compositional techniques that you hear in, a band like Coil or Death in June that work more heavily with samples.
Yeah, and it has all the best parts of kind of jammed or improvised music, in that you have all these separate parts doing an interesting thing that then will at times meet up and connect, and then leave and then meet up again. It just makes for while seemingly simple, chill music, it's very engaging.
Yes, we were talking while it was playing about how high energy this track is.
Yes, like right out of the bat.
And it's, which is interesting because of the sort of restraint in it, but like, think of the energizing feeling of looking at the ocean, even if the waves are not, crashing on the rocks, right?
It's the massiveness of it.
Yeah, and the feeling called to the horizon, right? Called to adventure. You really get that here. There's a concentration of effort on this track that is difficult to do in jam-based music, and you get the feeling that it all came together here, that they were jamming, they were pulling the best ideas from the jam, and then very deliberately composing them, right? Maybe writing shit down on a notebook to keep track of it. And that is... I feel like that's the peak of the focus, right? This is by far the most concentrated work on the record. And a full record at this level of focus would just be, astoundingly good. It's but there's a lot of other interesting stuff on here, and also some very good, more more targeted use of industrial sampling technology. So
the sort of industrial collage.
Yeah. So let's go. Speaking of which, let's go to the immediately following track, which comes from the same jam, right? It comes from the same jam and also has something very inspired to it, but kind of in a different way. So this is Metamorphosis, and we're going to play the whole thing because it's a minute and a half long.
Yeah. I was just thinking that's like sounds like what any number of the creatures from a Hieronymus Bosch painting, those are the noises they'd be making.
I love that. Yeah. A tortured creature, one of the tortured rather than the torturers.
Like a whimsical medieval horror.
Yeah. Yeah, so there's something comical about it, but also something genuinely horrifying about it. And I think you could say the description is just, it's abject, right? There's something sort of...
Just like gross. But it's a little goofy, but it's like, ooh. Makes you crawl a little.
There's something pathetic about it. You're hearing a body or you're hearing a person being a subject being overwhelmed and dissolved, and it's this feeling, as you pointed out, right? There are very wet sounds in the sample. And it's like a body it's a body spontaneously liquefying, right? The liquefaction of a body and a mind. And, this is a very different side of the ocean and a more, maybe more abstract take on liquid oceanic forces and processes than we get in the last one, right? Which is clearly just seafaring music.
Yeah. This one's definitely is a very almost purely industrial take on it, though, with that abstraction.
Yeah, and so you had some. Let's get into the industrial parallel. We'll come back to the more abstract stuff. What you came up with some really good industrial parallels in the notes.
Yeah, so I mean, I know Coil has already come up, and they'll come up again because it's the great project. I know Coil has at points used like strange or uncomfortable vocal samples. I mean, a lot of industrial bands have. It's a common thing. I think on Einstürzende Neubauten, Halber Mensch, they say like Halber Mensch and have it like all affected, and specifically Death in June's first album when they were still a band of three dudes. Yeah. They had the song All Alone in Her Nirvana, which starts out with like wet, wobbly, quivering. And there was one other one I was trying to think
that's
of,
dead on. The sample there's like
like super. It's that, and I mean, industrial music has always reveled in the abject, like that uncomfortableness. So you know, of course they use strange vocal noises that make you kind of squirm.
Yeah, Coil, just the example that Coil uses that stuff all over. Sometimes it has a strange beauty to it. Sometimes it's just horrifying and perverse. I think the best example that everyone will know is just the tittering laughter / possibly screams of boys in the anal staircase, right?
Yes.
Right, that's just
well, I mean, even John Balance does stuff. I was listening to Horse Rotorvator today, and I don't remember what song it is, but where he starts yelling about fucking the ground. And then he's grunting and like making noises like he's actually like having sex with the earth.
So speaking of that, this brings us back to some of the ideas here. So this is this notion of the liquefaction of a self, and there's a degradation to it, right? This isn't like a cool transformation, and so one thing I'm thinking is, how does it tie in? The immediately preceding track, right, is on the Cave of the Nymphs, and before that's Aphros, which, you know, maybe invoking Aphrodite or connected, and she's an oceanic goddess, right? She comes to shore on a shell, and on the Cave of the Nymphs, and she's born in the sea. On the Cave of the Nymphs is, right, there's this suggestion of luring feminine temptation, right? And it evokes at once many sort of nymph, cave, tempting woman, tempting nymph in the heart of the earth on the island dynamics in the Odyssey, right? All at once we've got sort of like sirens, we've got Calypso, and we've got especially Circe, who is technically maybe an enchantress, not a nymph, but structurally similar. And what happens on Circe's island is, of course, men are tempted with sex and given a drug that turns them into animals.
Yeah.
And Odysseus has to withstand this and reverse it. But this is and this all happens on an island as part of this oceanic journey, right? So the encounter with the nymph can be, if one goes in prepared for it, it can be a fortifying contact with, you know, the heart of the world, and one can pass out of it wiser and stronger. If one goes in unprepared, one can simply be sensually debased and unmanned, right? And we hear something like that here. You were pointing out during the sample that towards the back 2/3, right, you start to get this repeated, anxious, almost infantile, repeated, like, orgasmic sobbing.
Yeah, it's like a suffering and pleasure at the same time.
Yes, and then of course it just escalates and then explodes, but in a kind of pathetic way, and then all we get is bubbles.
Yep.
So, you know, very uncomfortable, and you know, you can almost just imagine like a body shivering and shaking and becoming more and more like a Francis Bacon painting until it pops. It's so, but this is also part of a broader tradition, stepping back from just the abject sort of horrifying side of it. It's part of a broader notion of the sea as metamorphic, as the sea as defined by its changes. You can think about Odysseus wrestling Proteus, right? Who is, you know, a sea god, who is the root word for protean. He's a shapeshifter. Or wait, who wrestles Proteus? No, that's not. No, that's not. Somebody has to. There are. We will circle back.
Menelaus.
Yeah, Menelaus on the shores of
it was Proteus of Egypt, the immortal old man of the sea.
Yes.
Sounds the deep in all its depths.
Cool, yeah. So Menelaus, on his journey home, right, has to wrestle him. Yeah. So, and, so we get that, and then we get this broader concern with metamorphosis as often a thing that is in some way degrading. So that also draws on Ovid or whatever. I don't know. Basically, what this points to is just the sheer depth of ingrainedness in where the early Norwegian black metal half accidentally tapped into this extremely deep sense of history from Grieg and Wagner all the way back to the sagas and whatnot. And it was half intentional, half accidental. And they saw what they were doing half as high art and clearly just half as necrotic dungeon metal. Spite Extremewing,
oh man, that's sick.
Yeah, Spite Extremewing really saw themselves as in dialogue with the entire history of Western art, right? And beyond, like music, art, literature, whatever. And they're drawing on a wealth of different strands of this tradition, especially the Mediterranean stuff and the classics. So you get that here for sure. Whether and the sense of narrative structure as in an Odyssey-like journey, whether it's Homer's Odyssey or the modernist Odyssey that we get in Pound's cantos, right? Which also are intensely Mediterranean. Anyway, let's go to something a little more clear cut and riffy. So this is a remix of a track called "The Flying Dutchman" that appears as track 8 Roman numeral on Ultra. We're not going to listen to the original because the differences are it's pretty similar in a lot of ways, and we've already done some extra sampling. But here it is remixed for this record by Algol, and we'll try to point out some of the stuff he's done and some of the other important things about this track. So just here's the first 2 minutes of this. Very, very spooky. And certainly spookier than it is on Ultra.
Yeah, they kind of inverted the atmosphere there.
He yeah, definitely. So you inverted the atmosphere. What do you mean by that? That's interesting.
Well, they took something more solar and made it more nocturnal,
Mm-hmm.
and something that I always thought that instrumental sort. Well, that is the instrumental track on Ultra, right? Or
Yes. Yeah,
the
yeah,
one
yeah.
of the ones, yeah. And just much more energized, much more forward and affirmative, where this one is sort of pulled back, and I guess the spookiness in it is it kind of it feels almost a little doubtful, a little uh, what's a good way to put it? Flighty.
Furtive. There's
Yeah,
something
hey,
stealthy about
hey,
it. There's something
furtive.
thief-like. There's
Yes.
I think there's another kind of narrative thing going on here, right? Here, right on the Spite Extreme Wing record, it is presented without any narrative association, right? The
Yeah, it's
interest is
just
not in
sound.
story; it's presented objectively. Yes, as a sonic
Mm.
thing, and that has to do with also its forthright, solar, energized presentation. Here, this is more. There's something a little more.
Clandestine, maybe.
Yeah, and more of a mimesis of story. You get like you get the it's called the Flying Dutchman, which leads us, it's a ghost ship. So you get the
Hmm.
initial guitar, which is not particularly spooky. That's more like sort of tranquil nautical music. And then it drops out and the bass comes in. And that moment is really highlighted on this mix.
Hmm.
Um, and it is a very sort of foreboding moment, but it's not like it's not like an aggressive drop. It's not like all of a sudden someone like hits a crash cymbal and then the tremolo starts, right?
Yeah.
It sort of starts to it slips into the picture, the ghost ship, and it hangs out there in dominating the middle of the song, and then it sort of or dominating the middle of that section, and then at the end it kind of slips away again. And that happens a few times over the course of the track. And so it's this sense of something that is both threatening and elusive, and kind of has a ghostly, an ethereal presence, something that may or may not be there. And yeah, so you get a ghost ship appears, ghost ship disappears, and it's an apt choice for this record because the record has to do with, as they say, making music as wandering, right? So this is the cursed wandering ship.
Hmm.
But yeah, musically, what we should talk about, right? The heart of the track is Azoth's bass work.
Yeah, I mean, just to put it out there, probably one of my favorite bass players at least in metal.
Mm-hmm.
He's very, very good at fitting the bass into the music in a way that matters.
Absolutely, and coming in with like these contrapuntal melodies that do more than
Oh
just
yeah.
support the guitar. And here it has the lead. And
Oh
this is
yeah.
the funny thing is it's a really ornate line, but it's so clearly articulated and has such a memorable form that I could just hum it instantly, right? I don't
Yeah.
think I even fucked that up at all, right? It's just very clear cut. And uh and so it's sort of that's highlighted here, and it shows us in a very obvious way something that was always really important to Spite Extreme Wing, as you say. Like, part of what Spite Extreme Wing, although pretty much every riff was epic and consonant, right? They often focused on especially broad noble intervals, right? They like their fifths, their minor sixths, their octaves, minor third, right? Just big crashing ascents and descents between these chords. And of course, a lot of that, and nevertheless, it never feels sugary or budget epic or diffuse. It's always extremely violent and tense. And part of that is from the skill, Argento's skill in the guitar lines and in the craftsmanship there. But part of it is also coming out of the bass work, which doesn't have as much melodic freedom as it does, say, in a track like this, but often is moving independently to add extra harmonic depth, and also has this crazy percussive attack to it, like you get with the bass in Discharge.
Mm-hmm.
So like it's a definitely a hidden strength of Spite Extremewing being showcased here. And, I think it's important to note that, all of the members, all three of the core participants were, crucial to this recording, right? It's not just a guitar thing. We should also note the bass sound here is quite different from Spite Extremewing, where that, is kind of produced like Discharge bass. This is, it has, or more of the bulldozer sound you get in Motorhead or Venom. This has watery reverb, right?
Yeah.
And that means it's goth bass, right? So this is that fits with the early Death in June stuff that I think is all over this record, and meshes really well with the guitar, which has a lot to do with Dædalus Rising or stuff like that.
Yeah, which is the Dædalus Rising, definitely an aquatic song, I think. I mean, you could say, Dædalus Rising with the wings and stuff, okay, but where'd they fall when they fell? Exactly.
Ooh.
Get sucked down into the ocean after flying too far to the sun.
Somebody made an infinite mix of that, combined with a different Death in June track, right? I think This Is Not Paradise, or called Paradise Rising. It's 30 minutes long, and it almost sounds the same as this Poseidon record, and has gull sounds on it. But yeah, the notes say that this was influenced by Current 93, but I'm pretty sure we agree this has more to do with D6.
Yeah, I mean, maybe, well, because here's the thing, it sounds a lot like late 80s Current 93, but late 80s Current 93 had a lot of Douglas Pierce in it.
Yes.
And they were all playing on each other's records. So, yes and no.
And I think the more aggressive, the more intense sampley stuff is a lot more I mean, I suppose there was that in the very early harsh industrial C93.
But I mean, the more sampley stuff would have more in common with Wall of Sacrifice or The World That Summer, rather than I don't know, the Swastikas for Naughty. Which, once again, sure, you could say Swastikas for Naughty kind of sounds like it too, but Douglas Pierce was on that record.
Yeah, so I think so let's go to Opalescence 101 now. I think we've showcased, we can also notice, I had some different notes about how how that track has been changed from 8 on Ultra, but I think we've, talked enough about that. So,
yeah, I mean, people can figure it out. They can go listen. They should have already listened to Ultra. I don't know what's wrong with them if they haven't.
Yeah, maybe this will be the episode that makes them finally do it.
What you're gonna do is you're gonna acquire the record in some way, and you're gonna have a way to play it in your car, and you're gonna go for a summer drive with all the windows down while you listen to Ultra.
Yeah.
That's what you're gonna do.
It's It's the number one way to meet babes.
Yeah.
So let's see. So let's talk now. We're going to go to a different sample and use that to get into what are some of the problems and maybe sort of some of the problems with work in this format and things that the weaker sides of the record. So we're going to go to this sample that comes from the first 3 tracks plus the Flying Dutchman are really the core of the record. And those first 3 tracks all come from one clearly very inspired session, and they all go together really well, right? Afro sets up Cave of the Nymphs, sets up Metamorphosis, and that kind of moment of dissolution there's a formal and narrative reason why it has to carry over into like the more muted mood of the Flying Dutchman. But after that, the energy seems to diffuse a little bit. Things become a little scattered, and it's not clear why things are happening in the places they're happening. And we get to Opalescence 101, track 6, and weirdly that comes from the one really good session that's the core of this record. But it's quite an outlier, and while a kind of cool track in itself, it's you'll hear the difference. Cruising. Right, so this is what this track really sounds like is krautrock, right? Kind of like a groove by like I think like Noi. I don't know that stuff very well, but it reminds me of Noi.
You know, can.
Mm-hmm.
I'd say it a little more laid back, not as up tempo, but similar to what's the Can record? And actually, it's interesting. I think of this because that Can record has like a trident on the cover. Future Days.
Really, an especially stoned Hawkwind, maybe.
Yeah.
So
I mean, I even hear. Like I said, I had mentioned you before, maybe even some like that early, like stoner rock stuff, like Kiss, or very early Queens of the Stone Age.
No, it for sure could be Caius or Queens of the Stone Age. Yeah. And so, what do you make of it? Because in some sense, this is like the groove is chill. I really like that.
Yeah.
That sort of more 80s toned. Kind of, it's like an 80s analog synth.
Yeah, the envelope on it is definitely like it's very much shaped up to have that slow attack.
It's almost like Gary Newman futuristic.
Yeah.
The sound palette here is pretty different.
Yes, and like once again, yeah, they were jamming. They were probably just like. Maybe this will sound cool, and like, it's fine.
Yeah, exactly.
and I was just gonna say, like, a lot of, like, it, but that makes it fit in with industrial music, because so many records by industrial neofolk artists, they're not songs records. They're usually they're albums. So there's gonna be weird little bits and pieces. It's more of a roller coaster of engagement.
Yeah, I think that's fair, but I think that's also like, so it's true to form, but it might be too true to form.
Yeah, like,
As in, we have the benefit of hindsight now when engaging with that 80s stuff, and one of the built-in weaknesses is that the record's going to be a little scattered and eclectic, and because people were throwing all sorts of shit against the wall to see what works, there just are sometimes bad tracks.
Yeah, it's like... Oh, go ahead.
This isn't like I don't dislike listening to this. I think it might belong well on a record of stuff that sounded like this, but it is a pretty complacent groove, right, that they sort of sink into. They shift between these two parts. The highest energy is that there are occasionally these nice shouts in the background when they change a part, which is cool. I like that. But, like, it's a little too much like sitting in on your buddy's jam session without the fun parts like the beer and that it's really loud.
Yeah, like, it's a little too chilled out compared to the strong points of this record.
Yes. And it's not just that the mood is more tranquil or relaxed. It's that it lacks there's something tranquil about, I don't know, some of the other tracks, but it's that it lacks the compositional focus. It lacks a certain a certain attack, a certain conviction. Yes, there's just less intensity of work in this. They have not cut and pasted their best riffs from different parts of the jam. They haven't combined concentrated forces here. This pretty much, I'm guessing this was a one and done, right?
Yeah.
Maybe they had the synth riff or something first, but this sounds like they pretty much just recorded it straight through. And also because it has that locked-in psych groove structure, it lacks the kind of environmental ambient openness that you get with the industrial stuff. So it's actually a really rigid, simplified rock form.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Riff A, riff sort of B, switchback.
Yeah.
And, there's a track before this that's more violent and industrial. That's kind of cool. And there's a track after this, Asa Turno, that's has something to do with the melody here. That's more oceanic and blissed out and is kind of cool. But altogether, these three last tracks are kind of less than the sum of their parts. And so I wonder, and that leads back to like how they've presented the record. I think it's left in kind of an odd, I think we're both really glad that this record is here, first of all. It's great to just hear from this configuration of musicians again.
I figured they were just kind of gone from the world of music.
Yeah, and there have been some Argento has done some Italian interviews lately and things like that, and I get the sense that they are thinking about their legacy and that perhaps this is paving the way for a return. But
God, I hope so.
At least in some form, maybe not as SEW.
Hey, anything, man.
Anything, right? But this is what they did with this release is because it was their first statement. These are the kinds of guys who do anything they do with real intensity, right? And so in this case, it was just like, okay, we've got these old tracks. We've wanted to get them released for a long time. There's definitely something cool here. But we also haven't done anything in a long time. So let's make this a big record, right? So I ordered the hard copy before I even heard it, right? And it's beautiful. It's this multimedia thing. It has postcards with Alfred Cuban illustrations in full color. It has, amazing photography on it. It has a booklet that's kind of a call and response thing prompting you to make your own, to write your own exploratory, structured improvisation of writing to go along with listening to the record. So it's they've made a very complete package, as you know. They always have this Gesamtkunstwerk ambition, but it's wrapped around a recording that is somewhat slight, right? And in some ways, I'd rather have this than just the handful of tracks, but I also wonder if the statement would be more effective simply as an EP with a lot of really good, with this wonderful hard copy edition and fleshing out. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it probably, yeah, no, I think maybe you could throw on like track 1, 2, and 3 and track 1 through 4, and then like one of the tracks from the back half.
Do track 1 through 4 and then A Saturno, right?
Yeah. I think that'd be pretty strong.
Either way, it's just great to have this configuration back in action and, working to pass their legacy on to the next generation. And we are excited to hear what's next.
I mean, no pun intended, but I hope it makes waves.
God, I could kill you.
earth. Leon like a lion, sleeping in the sunshine. Lion lies down. Lion lies down. Out of the strong came forth sweetness. Out of the strong came forth sweetness. I throw his bones over the white cliffs of Dover, and murder me in Ostia, and murder me in Ostia, the sea of Rome, on the bloodstained coast. Car reverses over the white cliffs of Dover and into the sea of Rome. You can hear the bones humming. You can hear the bones humming. Throw his bones over the white cliffs of Dover and into the sea of Rome.
Over there has gone, goes and will go. The copper sun tarnishes with the year's tears. The golden, golden copper sun, old, eldest dead, over the blue, milky sea sky, lost and losing. Do not weep, all this is passing. All the birds swing and fall through the heavens. The cloudy clouds of snow, of dew and of smoke. A shuddering reflection vanishing with the dropstone. Oh, I wait under the spaces, under the molten star rain, the flashing, falling planets. Do not weep. All this is passing. Do not weep. So high I could come, so far I shall fall. Dædalus broken, Dædalus falling by the toothed stones. His shape bends and makes a smiling bow. He careers and spirals down, falls. He waves words of farewell. Oh, do not weep. All of this passes. To fail is human. To fall is human. To hope is human. Do not weep as the sound disappears, as the rain falls, as the sky parts, as my tears fall. Do not weep, I shall wait for you, Dædalus broken, Dædalus falling. Do not weep, all this is falling. Do not weep, all this is falling. Do not weep, all this is passing. Do not weep, all this is passing.
And we are back from debating the merits of various Warhammer tabletop games to review Crooked Mouth, Between the Fool and the Magician. Out now on Ætheric recordings, on LP and Bandcamp, so that's their own independent release, and Heimat Music on CD, and that's a boutique label run by the guy from the sort of folkloric black metal-ish band Mosaic. So, Crooked, where Poseidon was kind of, protean and shifting and hard to define, Crooked Mouth is a lot more like a, down the line, you could just say, this is a Neofolk project. And in the mode of the classic Big Three Neofolk bands, this is a solo songwriter working with a semi-stable cast of collaborators. So this band really is just Ian Campbell, who's a formerly of the Victoria, British Columbia band Harrow, was sort of a Cascadian-ish black metal band, naturey black metal, where he played briefly with Kyle Brickle, now guitarist of Terminus favorites, Anahata. So, yeah, there's some ancient roots here that are interesting.
That's cool.
Yeah. So he's got so Ian has a Terminus connection and some history playing metal, but this is very much not a metal release. And this is another one that is a big on-concept record and has a long and well-written press release that is actually worth reading something from. In January 2022, Crooked Mouth upended his life and moved across the globe to Lithuania. This was a culminating step in a long search for creative freedom and a love affair with the Baltic world that started years before. Campbell took with him a collection of unfinished songs intended for his next release, and with the help of a cast of artists met during his travels, he has finally brought it to full manifestation. Let's see, what else? It has a he's joined on this journey by a cast of international weird folk characters. And so, yeah, there's a number of those collaborators, but the foremost include his fellow expat, an English expat, Adam Orms, which is a cool, very Neofolk name.
Yeah.
I think he's in the band picture with him. And a number of Lithuanian musicians in doing traditional folk stuff with names that will be difficult to pronounce, like Agota Zdanavičiūtė and Virginia Pievos. And
oh my goodness.
Yeah, that was a tricky one. And I don't know if I got it. So
close enough.
Yeah. So this is a record that really gets its impetus from and kind of documents a mystic quest. Right? Right. On the show we've reviewed a number of contemporary American black metal-ish bands, right, that we call them outlaw rock or whatever. And, trying to figure out how to transplant European tradition to North American soil and to do it in a way that isn't just in a way that genuinely respects and draws from this new landscape with its own history, right? In a way that respects the new soil. How do you carry this over into America rather than just trying to make European black metal in the U.S., right? So a good example of that would be like Elegiac or Mortem or something. But Crooked Mouth is kind of moving in the opposite direction, right? Right? Campbell seems to have felt so alienated and adrift in Canada, right? Even in the beautiful nature around Victoria, that he has repatriated to Europe. And I don't know if he comes from, I doubt he comes from Lithuania, but he's gone to a place there he wants to go, right? So Vilnius, capital of Lithuania. And what's notable there is that the Baltic countries were the last redoubt of paganism.
One of the big European internal crusades.
Yes. In black metal, you occasionally see the motif of the pagan knight. Well, in the Baltic countries, it was real. That is, they made it into the High Middle Ages, castles and plate armor, while still worshipping the old gods. And it took, and in one of the internal, you were saying, intra-European crusade.
That was the big, that was like the Teutonic Knights. That was their big thing, was the Baltic states.
Yes.
And,
Yeah, so the Baltic paganism was finally stamped out, but not really. Because well, go on.
No, that was like a big thing that they, the leaders converted, but really there was a lot of symbolic conversion and politicking more than actual full religious conversion.
The folkways persisted under the veneer of Christianity, and so this is a place where pagan revival was almost less a revival than a resurgence, and you can go to the Baltic countries today and actually just participate in well-attended public rituals, which is pretty cool, right? So in some ways he's gone to the Neofolk happy place, and that is very cool. And I'll come back to some of those themes a little bit later. But musically, right? How does it sound, Hyper Shaman?
I kind of halfway between Europe and America. I hear, of course, like a lot of classic Euro Neofolk, like Death in June, of course. Forseti, maybe just because of the accordion. Maybe that's what's making me think Forseti, but I'm thinking it anyways. Stuff like Of the Wand and the Moon for that more kind of modern, shinier Neofolk sound. But then also like an earthier, there's a lot of tracks that's that earthier kind of psych folk. Like specifically, it makes me think of In Gowan Ring,
Uh-huh. Oh, yeah. Who are
an American band.
He's American, yeah.
Yeah. So you got that new world, and then you got some old world.
Yeah. And it is a sort of like, I don't know, what else could we say about it musically? Yeah, I mean, there's much more. The mood is different. It is brighter and more spirited than a lot of the classic Neofolk, right? So
yeah, the stuff that lines up most with like Death in June. Death in June already had almost a pop-ish streak here and there.
Yeah,
a sort of sensibility, but this stuff, it once again, it almost feels like it's reaching back to some 60s, 70s,
right.
Sort of. I hesitate to use the word, but slight hippie-ish, and I don't mean that in a bad way.
Yeah, well, he's bringing out the hippie-ish vibes that were sort of present a little bit in the 80s stuff, but
oh yeah,
the death metal guy always complains that he would like Neofolk maybe if it were less dour, right? That the classic the classic bands is always very stern. The gestures that pop in Death in June are
my God,
heavily laced with bitter irony.
Or like Soul Invictus is just like Sturm und Drang.
Right.
It's just like
this old man is telling you to leave the pub. He's telling you to leave the pub now. He wants you to leave the entire village. Leave it. Right. Right.
Yeah.
This is so. Yeah. So there's something very stark and serious about it, which links to the to the roots in goth, in like Joy Division and in Joy Division and in industrial music, and the overall sort of militaristic undertone in that music, or overtone in that music.
The most percussive and miserable post-punk,
and
Closer,
right. And this is not. Oh, it's interesting that you say it Closer. I always say it Closer, but yeah, it's got a good double meaning there. Anyway, so yeah.
Oh, I meant like the Joy Division record.
Exactly. Yeah.
Oh,
I
yeah.
Closer. Okay. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, see what they did there. Anyway, Crooked Mouth basically has almost none of that, right? It'll be influenced by you get some of the industrial collage aesthetic, but only in the sense that the songs open up into more trippy, jammy, psychedelic parts.
It's very nice summertime jams.
Yeah, or a ritualistic intensity or whatever. But the overall mood of the music, even when it's solemn, is it's at least pointing towards joyousness, and it's often exuberant and bright. And it has a not in a bad way, it has a lightness to it. And so the only things that I can really compare that to in more recent stuff would be, say, like Forseti. Like Vinzeit is a very upbeat record, right?
Yeah. Well, and I know some modern of the Wand and the Moon stuff is crisper, a little more upbeat, although
also, he fell off really hard. He's just trying to be fucking like singer-songwriter now. I mean, shots fired, but there was the old stuff, right? Did have very Summer Solstice is like just a beautiful sort of warm and loving song, but even on that record, even on the perky stuff, there's usually fangs just under the surface. And this record is sort of much more focused on transformation, fertility, growth, and journeying than it is on austere warrior values.
Well, yeah, it's journey and creation. It's the Fool and the Magician.
Yeah, and you were pointing out that those are... I knew the Fool was a tarot card, but I guess the Magician is as well, you said?
Yeah, the Fool is generally, the Fool is the first in the major arcana, and the Magician is the second.
So,
that's pretty neat.
Yeah. So let's listen to it, and then we'll talk more about what about the ideas here. But this will give you a good sample of some of the bass line, the most neofolk, classically neofolk side of the record, and the mood, which is a little different from what you'd expect. So we're just going to listen to the first few minutes of Between the Fool and the Magician. That's the title track and the first track.
On the streets of the old town, silence gathers all around. Children tucked in for the night, taught by fools who fear the light. Like the laughs of little girls, floating thoughts of craven churls. Tyrants trapped in inner worlds, plotting nightmares to unfurl. Mocking jester laughs at me, jeering asks, are you not free? We learn how tight our chains can be, searching blindly for a key. There are few ways left to win, when you're blamed for father's sin. The jester laughing with his stupid grin. Am I the fool or the magician?
So you could hear that there's something distinctive about Crooked Mouth just in even those 2 minutes. You get, especially in that last little build you hear, right? He starts going to the whoa, and there's like a contraction in the time in the music, right? The rhythm tightens up, and you get this sort of percussive, the faster strumming, more syncopation, dun 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 dun, more pulsed, and you get that circling, swirling keyboard. I don't know if that's a mellotron, but it's kind of like the keys on the Poseidon record.
Let me.
What do you think? It's
yeah. Or. Yeah, no, it was. Sorry, I was taking a listen at it again to hear that. Yeah, I mean,
or is that one of the? Is that like a accordion or a harmonium or something?
I think. Yeah. Okay, so that's why I was confused. I was listening back because I was trying to hear if there was a keyboard. That's an accordion of some sort. That's some sort of squeezed instrument, I believe.
No, I think you're right. It's in the credits, right? Guitar and voice are ambitiously aided by instruments including accordion, harmonium, shruti box, melodium, conkless, jaw harp, even a birch vanta.
Yeah, so I'd like the harmonium, melodium. Mm-hmm. I believe both of those are different variants of squeezed instrument. Or oh no, a melody. Oh, okay. So there's melodians you can carry, and there's melodians you can sit at. Interesting to know.
Sort of like a hurdy-gurdy.
Yeah.
And hopefully easier to tune. So yeah, this is... So that's one thing worth pointing out is just like, there's depth of instrumentation is basically a part of neofolk, right? And it can go towards more of a neoclassical chamber sound, or... a lot of voices in the mix. However, in this, there's not just variety of voices, there's also cultural depth of instrumentation, as in, something we've pointed out about some of the classic neofolk records is there isn't much actual folk music on them. folk is more like a method and a preoccupation, right? With
Yeah, I mean, until you get to like when Michael Cashmore starts working with Current 93,
yeah,
then it starts getting a little more like that chamber music, folky. But yeah, generally it was always much more closer to industrial than folk music.
Acoustic post-punk, psych rock.
Yeah.
You know, there's some of the early the early kind of Sol Invictus has a folky cafe folk kind of sound to it, strummed acoustic, but you don't hear like finger picking or anything, right?
No, it's almost always just strumming chords.
Right. So there's a healthy movement of actual folk technique back into Neofolk, and you know, In Gowan Ring started that, this is and so Crooked Mouth is definitely continuing that and doing it also with all of these musicians from Lithuania. So you can hear some of that, but also you can hear that like a lot of tracks in this genre work at a fixed tempo and with sort of fixed rhythmic ideas. There's just a lot more expansion and contraction in this track, and there's a lot of and that surge of energy in the chorus or post-chorus is kind of unusual. This album has a lot more contrast than like classic Neofolk. I mean, a lot of times classic Neofolk, the biggest contrast you'd have, even between individual songs, might be like, oh, here's Death in June, and here's a weird little like noisy industrial thing in between two guitar songs. Right. But the tracks,
where this has the contrast within the songs themselves, even. And
it's a little more like singer-songwriter music, but not in a bad way, right?
No, not at all.
Yeah. It doesn't lose the distinct qualities of this genre. Also, so we should also talk about, I think, one of the, sort of like a feature of the record that's going to be a sticking point for some people and is maybe a limitation is how the vocals are delivered in moments like this. Right? So the vocals are, I think Campbell faced two paths here, and I think the path he took is he faced two paths here, right? One, if you have like a higher voice or whatever, right, or a voice that sounds more like he's singing basically in a natural, unaffected voice, right?
Yes.
He's not. If there's an affectation to it, it's one that's foreign to Neofolk and makes it sound more like basically indie rock or pop punk, right?
Yes.
And I think it might just be this is his higher register, so he's doing it. And what that means is he's escaping a certain trap of this music, which is heavy affectation in the vocals. Like, I have to make my voice sound as deep and as dead as possible so I can sound like Doug P. or, Ian Curtis.
The certain, I mean, there's kind of a joke that, like, of course they can't sing, it's Neofolk.
Or like really, or on the other hand, you get like really wispy, ethereal, fairy vocals like in Gowan Ring or whatever, right?
Yeah. Or David Tibet's spoken word, breathy, and like you said, fairy,
highly theatrical, contorted. Yes. These are just like, this is just a guy singing some songs. And I like the honesty to that, and in a genre like this that depends often on putting on, it can either be a strength or a weakness, but putting on certain fixed masks. That expressiveness is cool, but I can't say that I love the nasal tone on tracks like this.
Yeah, it's a specific nasal tone with a I don't know how to explain it, but definitely in the realm of like the kind of indie pop punk stuff. I mean, I know in the notes I specifically said he reminds me of one of the guys from They Might Be Giants. Which, like, I don't know, it not necessarily a bad thing, but like if I'm going to listen to They Might Be Giants, I'm listening to They Might Be Giants. If I'm listening to Neofolk, I'm listening to Neofolk. I think after listening to the record a few times, which I have, I enjoyed it enough that I listened to it maybe like 3-4 times. Like it doesn't really bother me as much now, but at the very first listen, it was a bit jarring. It kind of took me out of it I was like, oh, that's different.
And it's especially jarring if the focus is on this kind of re-immersion in the European aspects of the genre and its historical precedent, right?
It sounds very North American.
Right. 1476 is a explicitly North American neofolk that also has vocals like that. And I would say it's a sticking... I think they're a cool band, but I don't really listen to them because the vocals sound like pop punk.
Oh, they're kind of the...
It at least makes sense in their context, right? Because they're trying to do sort of North American neofolk.
And they also kind of got a death rock.
Oh. Yeah. Oh, they've got really cool record collections. Yeah, death rock, goth thing. Yeah, they clearly were just like emo hardcore dudes from New Jersey or whatever, or from New England who started doing this. But so it kind of makes sense there. But this is in the opposite direction. But yeah, I also agree. It's not like a huge deal, and part of that is because he takes different approaches. Often he foregrounds other vocalists, and in many tracks he delivers his vocals differently. And which we'll get to on the samples, he delivers them differently and mixes them differently in a way that make them a lot more effective. But I think on the most sort of bright, straightforward, strummy neofolk tracks, this and maybe also the May Queen's Radiant Astral Light, which is at the end, these sort of bookend the record. They're those are the places where the vocals kind of pop in a way that might give people pause. But I think we really encourage listening through that because the core of the record is really awesome. So it's almost like there's a there are these more sort of, there are these tracks at the beginning and end that almost seem like maybe those were more finished when he went to Lithuania. And then there are the tracks in the middle have all been worked and expanded and distorted in various really cool ways. The album structure moves kind of like into and out of sleep, and so there's a plot to it. If Poseidon had something to do with questing through the Mediterranean, this is well, it has a lot to do with the existential quest at the heart of the lyrics and at the heart of this record, which maybe I'll go back to at the end because I want to get us more into the samples. But yeah, this is here. The quest is figured as passage into sleep, deeper and deeper into dream, and then back out into daylight, transformed. So track 2 is Repine in Soporific Fields, literally about going to sleep. Track 3 is Guardian of the Threshold, which is which is about the entry into deep dream and a sort of a confrontation with a voice beyond the self. And let's go to that one, and we will. You can hear the huge shift in everything about it. This is one of the most industrial tracks, and it's featuring vocals by the guy from the German project Art Abscons. It's also got some really beautiful Lithuanian harp playing, I think you said. So
yeah, it looks like a sort of zither, so it's, you're gonna have some sort of frame with then the strings. I mean, technically a hammered dulcimer is a zither. So I mean, calling it a dulcimer is not that far off.
Oh yeah, I called it a dulcimer in the notes. It's I think it's what's called the conclus, and it
that you cannot search that word. Oh wow.
Yeah, all you'll get is cankles.
Yeah.
But
here we go. Conkless instrument.
yeah.
Yeah, it reminds me of I was saying, no, I have a hillbilly uncle who can play the auto harp, and it looks like that.
Well, that's very cool. Yeah, the name sounds a little bit like Kantella from Finland, so I thought maybe.
It's not. Yeah, no, it's not that far off from that. It's in the harp-ish family.
Basically, it's a long sample because I want to showcase not just the very cool delivery of the lyrics, but the lovely conkless playing.
Mm-hmm.
So that is some that's some drone, right? I love the drone laid down under that, and the kind of the pulsed stuff plucking of the harp is I don't know, works a little bit like the driving pulse in that Poseidon song we both really liked, and the real focus here is the vocals and the lyrics. This has the kind of meditative space that you get on some of the classic 80s records. Think especially of like How to Destroy Angels by Coil asks you to just meditate on each cymbal crash. This draws a similar attention to the words. And this is about... What?
Oh, I was saying that the subject matter, but I think you were about to talk about it anyways.
Go.
Oh, yeah, just say it's, this album, obviously he was going through maybe a certain crisis of self-discovery that drove him to go to Lithuania. It's, what do you want to be? Who do you want to be? It's very much reflective.
Yeah. Yeah, this is a moment of being sort of how do we insert this into the broader plot? Let's go to the broader stuff I wanted to talk about on the last sample. So if you go to the lyrics for the title track, right, you get children tucked in for the night, taught by fools who fear the light. The floating thoughts of craven churls floating like the laughter of children. Tyrants trapped in inner worlds, plotting nightmares to unfurl. The feeling of being mocked by a jester, asking, "Are you not free? Can you not? Why can't you free yourself from this situation? Or maybe isn't this freedom? Haha." And you get tyrants trapped in inner worlds, plotting nightmares to unfurl is a particularly good couplet, I think, and evokes the feeling of a time when people who were very comfortable living imprisoned in front of screens attempted to lock down the rest of the world, right? Right. So, and also the idea that there's in technocratic attempts to control the world, they're driven by an intense introversion and neurosis. But also the feeling maybe that one is oneself trapped in an inner world and is unable to break out of it in these conditions, right? The feeling that the jester is mocking him, right? And I feel like this kind of it really puts us in the situation of being isolated, alienated, adrift in modernity. And it sort of, it shows Campbell interacting with the old Neofolk bands, right? Those bands all had these larger-than-life figures, right, who were within the modern world and sort of adapting to it, using its technologies, and yet who spoke to us from outside it, right? And somehow, in the sea of shit, they stood with their heads high, and they were clearly oriented towards enduring things, right? And they maybe sometimes heavy-handedly pointed us towards their own models, right? People like Evola or Mishima or Junger.
Yeah.
And all those guys, right? Everyone who was talked about on Heathen Harvest in 2010, all those guys basically wrote how-to guides, right? How do you do this? How do you be in but not of in that way? But trying to actually do that on your own when you're adrift in the midst of this slippery yet stifling age, right? That's another thing. And it takes years, maybe your whole life, and it's messy, silly, ugly, and you often find yourself wondering, right? Am I the magician or the fool? Right? And the record tracks that process, which he, for him clearly involved this spiritual journey that corresponded to a geographic journey to Lithuania. It tracks that process, and he's sort of showing his work. He's like, here I go, fully committing to it, and with the kind of humility. So in this track, right, it's a prophetic contact with a god in a dream, and the god and he feels humiliated before it, right? Just utterly overawed and ashamed of himself and his life. And this crisis moment, and in that crisis moment, he is challenged to become something more and chart his own path. And what does it mean to be truly free? I think that's it's very powerful, and it is different approach to a kind of fixed trope of the genre that I think is, like a lot of this record, it is more expressive, it's more opening up and inviting in. And I think a lot of people will find that compelling and also consoling.
Yeah, this is a comforting, no, I've often listened to a lot of Neofolk as non-comforting music at bad times. I was probably deepest in my obsession of Neofolk and martial industrial in some of the worst parts of my life. But then we have this Neofolk here that's like, it's very hopeful.
Yeah. No,
it's not talking about a lot of Neofolk talks about, goes into this crisis of modernity and, how do you live? The West is dead, death of the West, and it doesn't necessarily have direction to it. It's just sort of, ruminating on it. Ruminating on the fact that the West is dead, where this guy is like very hopeful.
Yeah, I think it's, you have to be able to, a full life is more than just the constant feeling of preparing for battle, right? And, with a lot of that stuff, like the Tony Wakeford stuff especially, right?
Oh my God.
It oscillates between just the resolve of the hero going to his death and just like complete pessimism, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, so this is a record that wants to, how do you, if you're trying to live a life being trapped in that kind of apocalyptic mentality, can make a life completely unlivable, right? And this is a guy who's interested in freeing himself, not just from the world around him, but also from modes of opposition that aren't always productive psychologically, right? And yeah, how do you live as a joyful, well-rounded person who is in touch with the world around you and the people around you? And so that's pretty cool. Yeah, so speaking of which, let's talk about one of the most embracing tracks on the record, which was one of your picks.
Yeah, probably, as I said, one of my favorite songs on this record. Very dreamy, but also like a summertime walk, almost, sort of a certain peaceful loveliness, and a little neo-medieval in places. But yeah, this is Arms of the Mountain.
Is there an ending to love? Is there an ending to love? There is an ending.
So yeah, it's seems like a song about death to some degree. Is there an end to love? There is an end. Is there an end to love? There is no end. Followed by when the arms of the mountain take you home. I mean, it's I guess a somewhat morbid subject matter in some sort of death, whether physical or spiritual, but it's comfort. The arms of the mountain will take you home. Like, I don't know. That doesn't sound so bad.
I feel like I listened to it almost as... I took it more literally as going up into the mountains. Maybe after, after the end of some love or something, but returning to the... returning to the center of things.
Yeah.
I think
even
that's...
if... Yeah.
I think that's always... What?
Oh, I was just saying, even, it's, yes, there's an end, but there are no endings. You can always return.
Exactly, yes. It's a very life-affirming track, and I mean, in some ways, that notion of rerouting in nature and in a consciousness of time in the longest sense of a cyclic unfolding and looping on itself, and building through repetition. That's been very important to all the Neofolk stuff. This is the kind of, on this track, this is the kind of high intensity solace that was in Death in June songs, or in current 93 songs, even in the late 80s, early 90s. And also the cool thing is that from there, right, we're at 2/3 of the way through the track, it only opens up more. And so this is a place where, like, you get some of the folky singing, but it's a lot more repetitive, and you get this undertone of drone and an evolving jam. And the last third of the song is just like a dance,
Yeah, and that's where I heard a lot of that sort of neo-medieval folkish stuff, a lot like, as I wrote in the notes, reminded me of some of the stuff from the Revolutionary Army of the Infant Jesus. It's a mouthful, but a good English act. Definitely kind of a more, despite the name, pagan-sounding English Neofolk.
Interesting. I'll have to check that out. Yeah. So maybe does it have kind of more like chant-like or prayer-like lyrics? Because this feels also like a prayer and a dance.
Yes, there is definitely a certain chanting processional feeling to some of their stuff, which you get here also.
You could imagine this being sung around a campfire and people dancing around the campfire, which is a cliche fucking image that gets employed a lot in this music, but actually.
Yeah.
And we got your last sample.
Yeah, this one's just another, I guess, and quotations on purpose, quote unquote, poppier. And poppier in relative terms, compared to some of the more wandering, wide songs. This is Black Madonna at the Gates of Dawn, which seems more standard Neofolk at first, but there's some interesting stuff in there that kind of brings me back to the certain link to maybe North American, I guess even European 60s, 70s stuff, maybe even a weird connection to the Poseidon record in that way. So let's take a listen to this one.
Shrouded mother hangs overhead, and
right. So definitely peep that not Rose McDowell ghostly fairy vocals in the background. That's probably direct reference to some of that old stuff. And then also, more blatantly, the almost Carlos Santana-esque psych guitar jam going on. And that kind of just keeps going for the rest of that song, if I remember correctly, which is different, but kind of cool, and it works. And kind of adds a certain, once again, almost like the Poseidon album, certain 60s, 70s sort of feel. Once again, back to the almost hippie, once again, no offense meant by this, because usually when I use this word, it is meant to be offensive, but sort of hippie feeling to it. Even with the, that sort of almost irreverent protest lyrics of, hey, hey, do what they say. Hey, hey, you're fading away. You know, life isn't sickness and your blood is your witness, you know. Sort of a feralness with those last lines, but the shouting of hey, hey, like that's straight out of like you know, some like Woodstock almost.
Dark side hippie, Abraxas.
Yeah, much better than regular hippies, I'll admit.